For 40 long years, Margaret believed she was living inside a love story, one of those rare tales people dream about but hardly ever find. From the very first day she met James, she felt as if fate itself had gently placed him in her path. She was only 22 then, young, hopeful, and working as a librarian in a small town where everyone knew everyone. James was a tall, soft-spoken man who had recently moved there to manage a local bank branch. He had the kind of presence that drew people in, calm, confident, and always smiling. Their first meeting wasn't planned. He had walked into the library one rainy afternoon, looking for a book about finance, and she, nervous but eager to help, accidentally dropped a whole pile of books at his feet. Instead of getting annoyed, he had laughed, that warm, genuine laugh that stayed with her long after he left. That small, silly moment turned into coffee dates, late-night talks, and promises whispered under moonlight. They married a year later, surrounded by family, friends, and a sky full of hope. Their wedding wasn't lavish, but it was filled with love. Margaret remembered how her mother told her that day, "Honey, marriage isn't about grand gestures. It's about waking up next to the same soul every day and still choosing them." And for 4 decades, she chose James. They built a modest home on the outskirts of town, a white 2-story house with blue shutters and a little garden that Margaret adored. Every morning she watered her roses, while James sat on the porch reading the newspaper. It became their ritual, quiet, simple, yet perfect. James was hard-working and responsible. He never missed a birthday, never forgot an anniversary, and every Sunday morning, he'd bring her breakfast in bed, pancakes, scrambled eggs, and a kiss on the forehead. To the outside world, they were the picture of everlasting love. Their neighbors often said, "If I could have a marriage like Margaret and James, I'd never ask for more." Even their children, Sarah and Daniel, looked up to them as the definition of what love should be. Life wasn't always easy. They faced their share of storms. When James lost his job during an economic downturn, Margaret took extra shifts at the library to help with bills. When Margaret's father passed away, James held her for nights until the tears stopped coming. When their son Daniel got into an accident during college, they prayed together every night by his bedside until he recovered. They weren't just husband and wife. They were a team, a partnership, 2 souls that leaned on each other through the seasons of life. As the years passed, wrinkles appeared on their faces, but their laughter stayed young. They spent evenings sitting by the fireplace, sipping tea and reminiscing about the past. Margaret would sometimes say, "Can you believe it's been 40 years, James? How it feels like yesterday." And James would smile, squeeze her hand and reply, "I'd do it all over again." Maggie. Those words meant everything to her. She believed him with every beat of her heart, every anniversary. They danced to the same song, "Can't Help Falling in Love." Margaret would rest her head on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat and thinking, "This is what forever feels like." She thought their love had no secrets. She thought she knew every corner of his soul. His favorite foods, the way he hummed when he was nervous, the little sigh he made before falling asleep. To her, James wasn't just a husband. He was her home, and so when she looked back on their 40 years together, she saw a lifetime of shared dreams, raising their kids, growing old together, watching sunsets from their porch. She believed their story was unshakable, untouchable, built on trust and honesty. But the thing about life is, even the strongest walls can hide cracks. Even the most beautiful smiles can mask guilt. What Margaret didn't know, what she could never have imagined, was that behind James's calm eyes, there lived a secret. A secret so deeply buried that it would eventually destroy everything she thought she knew. It started small, like a shadow hiding in the corner of a perfect painting. But as the years went by, that shadow grew darker, and on the day they were supposed to celebrate 40 years of marriage, the day she believed would be one of the happiest of her life, that shadow would step into the light. Margaret had no idea that her world, so carefully built on love and trust, was about to collapse. That the man she had loved for 4 decades was not the man she thought he was. Because sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who hide the deepest lies. The golden anniversary. 40 years of love, laughter, and loyalty. That morning, Margaret woke up earlier than usual, her heart light and full of joy. Today wasn't just any day. It was the day she had been dreaming about since their wedding. a celebration of 4 decades of marriage. The early morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting the room in soft gold. She turned to her side, smiling at the sight of James still sleeping peacefully. His hair had turned silver, but to her he was still the same man she had fallen in love with at 22. Quietly, she slipped out of bed, not wanting to wake him. She stood before the mirror looking at her reflection. Time had left its gentle marks, lines around her eyes, silver streaks in her hair, but her heart still felt young. 40 years, she whispered to herself. We made it. Downstairs she began preparing breakfast, his favorite as always. Toast with butter, 2 eggs sunny side up and a steaming cup of coffee. She set the table neatly, added a small vase with fresh daisies and smiled. Daisies, his favorite flowers. They were the same ones she carried in her wedding bouquet all those years ago. When James came down, dressed neatly in his usual grey suit, she greeted him with her warmest smile. Happy anniversary. Darling, she said, kissing his cheek. Ah, yes, 40 years, he murmured, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Margaret didn't notice. She was too busy talking about the plans she had made. She had spent the whole week arranging a surprise dinner. Their children, Sarah and Daniel, were flying in that evening. She had invited a few close friends, ordered a beautiful cake, and even found an old record player to play their wedding song. Tonight will be special, she said, pouring him coffee. You'll love it, James nodded absently, glancing at his watch. I might be home a little late, he said, avoiding her eyes. Some things to finish at the office. Margaret laughed softly. On our anniversary? You and your work. She playfully shook her head. Don't be too late, okay? Everyone will be here around 7. He smiled in that same practiced polite smile and kissed her forehead. I'll try, Maggie. She watched him leave, her heart swelling with love and pride. To her, he was still the man who had stood by her side through everything. She couldn't wait to surprise him, to see his face when he walked into the candlelit room surrounded by the people who loved them both. All day, Margaret worked tirelessly. She cooked James's favorite dishes, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and her special apple pie. She arranged photos of their life together on a large board, wedding pictures, family vacations, and tiny handwritten notes he had once left her on the fridge. As the clock neared 6, she dressed in a soft blue dress, the same shade she wore on their honeymoon. She even put on the pearl earrings James had given her on their 10th anniversary. Her reflection glowed with quiet excitement, but as the minutes ticked by, something began to feel off. By 6:30, guests started arriving. The house filled with laughter and chatter. Sarah hugged her mother tightly. Mom, this looks beautiful. Where's Dad? He's on his way, Margaret said with a smile, though her voice wavered slightly. She picked up her phone and sent a quick message. Everyone's here. Hurry home, love. No reply, 7 o'clock. The candles flickered softly on the dining table. Still no sign of James. 8 o'clock. The laughter had grown awkward. Guests exchanged looks. Sarah's smile had faded into concern. Margaret's phone buzzed. A text message. She opened it quickly, expecting an apology or maybe a sweet anniversary message. But what she read froze her heart. Don't wait for me tonight. I'll explain later. That was all. No love, no reason. Just a short, cold message that made her breath catch in her throat. Sarah saw the look on her mother's face. Mom, what happened? Margaret blinked, forcing a smile. He must be busy. Let's start dinner. She didn't want to ruin the night for her children, so she smiled through the ache in her chest, served food she could barely taste, and pretended everything was fine. But inside, her mind raced. Why would he miss their anniversary? Why wouldn't he even call? For 40 years, James had never forgotten a special day. Never once. When the guests left and the house fell silent, Margaret sat alone at the dining table. The candles had burned down to wax puddles, and the untouched cake sat in the center, a symbol of everything she thought she had. Her eyes drifted toward their framed wedding photo on the wall. 2 young lovers smiling, holding hands, promising forever. Where are you, James? She whispered softly. That night, for the first time in 40 years, Margaret went to bed alone. The space beside her felt cold and unfamiliar. The silence in the house was deafening, and though she didn't know it yet, that one text, that one strange, hollow message, was the beginning of a storm that would soon tear her perfect world, part because love built on trust can crumble in a single moment of betrayal, and Margaret's heart was about to learn just how fragile forever could be. The morning after the anniversary that never happened, the house felt heavier than usual. The air was thick with silence, the kind that follows heartbreak before you even understand it. Margaret sat at the breakfast table, her cup of coffee untouched. She kept glancing at the clock, 8:15 a.m. James still wasn't home. He had never stayed out all night before, not once in 40 years. Her mind searched for excuses. Maybe he had to work late. Maybe he stayed with a colleague. She tried to believe that, but deep down something didn't feel right. At 8:45 she heard the front door open. James walked in, his shirt slightly wrinkled, tie loosened and eyes tired. "Where were you?" she asked softly. He sighed, setting down his briefcase. "I told you, Maggie. I had some things to take care of. It got late, so I stayed at the office." Margaret wanted to believe him. She really did. 40 years of marriage had taught her to trust, but this time there was something different in his tone. His voice felt distant, almost mechanical. "You missed our anniversary," she said quietly. He winced but didn't look at her. "I know, I'm sorry. I'll make it up to you, I promise." She nodded slowly, though her heart ached. "You've never missed one before." James kissed her forehead and mumbled, "I'll explain later, okay? I just need to rest." Then he went upstairs, leaving her alone in the kitchen, surrounded by cold food and fading decorations from last night's celebration that never happened. That day she decided not to press him. She wanted to believe it was just work stress. After all, they had shared a lifetime. A single night couldn't erase 40 years, could it? But fate has a strange way of revealing truth when you least expect it. That evening, Margaret was cleaning the living room. The faint sound of rain tapped against the windows, and the smell of lemon polish filled the air. She was straightening the cushions on the couch when something small slipped between them and hit the floor with a soft thud. It was James's phone. She frowned, picking it up. He must have left it there before going upstairs. The screen was still unlocked. Her thumb hovered above it for a moment. She had never snooped through his things before. She trusted him completely. They didn't keep secrets, or at least she thought they didn't, but something inside her whispered, "Check it." Her heart began to race as she opened his messages. The first few were normal: bank notifications, work emails, texts from their children. But then she saw a name she didn't recognize. Clara. Margaret froze. Her fingers trembled as she clicked on the chat. At first, she thought it must be a co-worker, a friend maybe, but then her eyes caught a glimpse of the words, and her world began to crumble. "Last night was beautiful. I can still feel your arms around me. When will you tell her, James? She deserves to know. You're all I think about. I love you." Her hand covered her mouth as if trying to hold in a scream. She scrolled through the messages, her breath catching at every word. There were hundreds of them. Sweet nothings, late-night confessions, hotel bookings, even pictures of them together. Her knees went weak. The phone slipped from her hands and hit the floor, the sound echoing through the empty room. No, it can't be true, she thought, tears streaming down her cheeks. Not James. Not him. She sat there for what felt like hours, her hands shaking, her mind replaying every moment of their 40 years together. Every kiss, every laugh, every "I love you" that now felt poisoned by lies. Her heart felt as if it had shattered into pieces she could never put back together. When James finally came downstairs, freshly showered and pretending as if nothing was wrong, Margaret sat on the couch, pale and silent, holding his phone in her lap. He froze when he saw it. For a moment the mask he wore every day slipped, and she saw panic flicker in his eyes. "James," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Who is Clara?" He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His face turned pale. Maggie, please, don't lie to me," she said, her tone rising, pain mixing with anger. "Who is she?" He swallowed hard, his silence answering the question she already knew. Margaret's vision blurred with tears. 40 years, James. 40 years I trusted you. I gave you everything, my youth, my love, my loyalty. And you gave me this? He stepped toward her, his hands outstretched, but she pulled back. "Don't touch me." The rain outside grew heavier, the thunder rolling like her breaking heart. That night, The truth stood between them like a ghost that could never be buried again. And for the first time in her life, Margaret realized, sometimes love isn't destroyed by hatred, it's destroyed by betrayal, quietly, painfully, and without warning. As James stood there speechless, Margaret looked at him one last time. The man she thought she knew, the man she had loved for 40 years, was a stranger now. And in that moment, something inside her changed forever. The rain outside poured harder that evening, as if the sky itself was weeping for Margaret. She sat motionless on the couch, the phone still resting in her trembling hands. Her eyes were red and swollen, her heart pounding so loudly it echoed in her ears. Each raindrop that struck the window felt like the sound of a memory breaking apart. When James walked in from the kitchen, drying his hands with a towel, he froze. He knew instantly that she had found it, the truth he had buried under lies and years of practiced smiles. "James," she said softly, her voice trembling but firm. He turned to her slowly, his face pale. There was no pretending now. The truth was written all over the room, in her eyes, in her shaking hands, and in the silence that hung like a blade between them. "Who is Clara?" Margaret asked. For a moment he didn't speak. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. The air grew thick, heavy, suffocating. Maggie, I can explain." "Explain what?" Her voice cracked. "Explain how you've been lying to me for years. How you've been telling another woman you love her while sleeping next to me every night." He took a hesitant step forward. "Please listen." "No," she shouted, standing up so fast the phone fell from her lap and hit the floor with a loud clatter. "Don't you dare ask me to listen, James. I've listened to you for 40 years. I believed you, trusted you, and this is what you were doing behind my back." Tears spilled down her face, but her anger burned brighter than her pain. James ran a hand through his hair, unable to meet her eyes. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Margaret laughed bitterly through her tears. "Didn't mean to? You've been with her for years." "How many, James? How long?" He swallowed hard. 8. The word hit her like a hammer. 8 years. 8 years of shared lies, stolen moments and secret texts, all while she had been cooking his meals, washing his clothes and believing in their love. Margaret's knees buckled slightly, and she steadied herself on the arm of the couch. Her voice came out broken, whisper-like. 8 years? That's almost a decade. I thought we were happy. I thought you loved me." James finally looked up, his eyes wet. "I do love you, Maggie. I always have. But things changed. I don't know how it happened. I was lonely and lonely," she interrupted sharply. "You had me. You had a wife who loved you with everything she had. I gave you my youth, my dreams, my whole life, James. And you call that lonely?" Her voice trembled with both fury and heartbreak. The words spilled from her like a flood that had been held back for too long. "You stood beside me through sickness, through loss, through everything. And now I find out it was all a lie." She wiped her tears roughly. "Was she there when your father died? Was she there when I stayed up with you every night worrying about your job? Or when I held your hand in the hospital during your surgery? Where was she then, James?" He said nothing. He just stood there, his eyes full of guilt and shame. "I don't even know who you are anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. James took another step toward her, his voice breaking. "Maggie, please. I made a mistake. I was weak. She held up her hand. "Stop." Her voice was cold now. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or saying something hurtful in anger. What you did wasn't a mistake, James. It was a choice. And you made that choice every single day for 8 years. The truth hung heavy between them. Neither of them spoke for what felt like forever. The sound of thunder filled the silence, deep, rumbling, almost angry. Margaret finally turned away, wiping her tears. "You destroyed us," she whispered. "You destroyed everything we built." "I never meant to hurt you," he said weakly. She looked back at him, her face hardened by heartbreak. "Then why did you? Why didn't you stop?" He had no answer. He stood there, the weight of his silence louder than any apology he could ever give. Margaret took a deep breath, her voice breaking but resolute. "I don't know what happens next, James, but I can't stay here tonight. Not in this house. Not with you." He reached out as if to stop her, but she stepped back. "Don't." Then she walked past him up the stairs and closed the bedroom door behind her. For the first time in 40 years, she locked it. Downstairs, James sank into the chair, burying his face in his hands as the sound of her quiet sobs drifted through the ceiling. That night, neither of them slept. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window as lightning illuminated the rain-soaked garden, the same garden she once tended with love. And in that cold, silent moment, she realized that the man she thought she knew, the life she thought she had, and the love she had built her world upon, had all vanished like mist in the storm. The next morning the sun rose as if nothing had happened, but inside Margaret's heart, everything had changed. The world outside continued in its usual rhythm, birds chirping, cars passing, life moving forward. But inside that house, time had stopped. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked steadily, each second cutting into the heavy silence that filled the air. Margaret sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale, and her heart utterly broken. Upstairs, James moved quietly. She could hear his footsteps, the creak of the floorboards. Sounds that used to bring her comfort now only reminded her of betrayal. When he finally came downstairs, their eyes met for the first time since the night before. There was no warmth, no tenderness, just emptiness. "Margaret," he began softly, "please, let's talk." She shook her head. "There's nothing left to say." He stepped closer, his face etched with guilt. "I know I hurt you. I've been a fool, but I swear she means nothing now. I ended it months ago. I just didn't know how to tell you." Her voice broke as she whispered, "You ended it months ago? James, the damage was done years ago." He opened his mouth to speak again, but she raised her hand, stopping him. "Do you even realize what you've done? You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our children, our home, our memories." Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back. "Every smile you gave me these past 8 years was a lie. Every time you said, 'I love you,' you were lying. Do you know how that feels?" James's shoulders sagged, his eyes wet. "I never stopped loving you, Maggie." "Don't call me that," she interrupted sharply. "You lost the right to call me that." The silence that followed was suffocating. She turned away, her gaze landing on the framed photos lining the mantel. Their wedding picture, their children's birthdays, their family trips. Each photo was a reminder of the life she thought she had, a life that now felt like an illusion. In one of the pictures, James had his arm around her, both of them smiling under a summer sky. She stared at that image for a long time, her vision blurring with tears. "What am I supposed to do with 40 years, James?" she whispered. "How do I throw them away?" He stepped closer, desperate. "Don't, please, we can fix this. I'll do anything. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just don't walk away from us." She laughed bitterly through her tears. "Us? There is no us anymore. You destroyed that with your choices." For a moment they stood there, two people who once promised forever, now separated by a lifetime of lies. Finally, Margaret straightened her back. Her voice was trembling but determined. "I need to go. I can't breathe in this house anymore." "Go where?" James asked, panic rising in his tone. "To my sister's," she said. "I need time to think." He reached out, his voice breaking. "Please, Maggie, don't leave like this." She looked at him one last time, her expression filled with both sorrow and strength. "You already left me, James. You just didn't have the courage to say it out loud." She walked past him, tears streaming down her face, and headed upstairs. The sound of her suitcase zipping echoed through the house like a final goodbye. As she packed, every object she touched held a memory. The old sweater he bought her on their trip to Paris, the photo of them on their first anniversary, the small locket with their wedding date engraved on it. Everything was a reminder of love turned into ashes. When she came back down, suitcase in hand, James stood by the door, tears running down his face. "Please," he whispered, "don't go." She hesitated for a moment, her heart aching. Despite everything, a small part of her still loved him, or at least the man she thought he was. But she took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped outside. The cold morning air hit her face, sharp and real. It felt like stepping into a new world, painful, uncertain, but hers. As she drove away, she looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The house stood silently, the home that had once been filled with love, now just a shell of memories. When she arrived at her sister Linda's house, Linda opened the door and gasped. "Oh my God, Margaret, what happened?" Margaret couldn't speak. She just fell into her sister's arms and sobbed, years of trust, love and pain spilling out all at once. That night, Margaret lay awake on the guest bed, staring at the ceiling. The tears had stopped, but the ache remained. She thought about all those years she spent believing in something that was never real. I thought about the woman named Clara, and she thought about the man she had loved so deeply, who had turned out to be a stranger. Her wedding ring felt heavy on her finger. Slowly, she slipped it off and placed it on the nightstand beside her. For the first time in 40 years, Margaret fell asleep without it, and the silence that followed was not peace, but the beginning of a new, painful kind of freedom. The days that followed were long and hollow. Margaret stayed at her sister Linda's small farmhouse, a quiet place surrounded by trees that whispered with the wind. The mornings were crisp and silent. No clatter of James making coffee, no soft hum of the radio they always listened to together. For the first time in decades, she was alone with her thoughts, and that silence was both a comfort and a curse. Linda moved gently around her, trying not to ask too much. She knew that when a heart breaks after 40 years, words can't fix it. They only remind you of the pieces. One afternoon, as the light filtered through the lace curtains, Margaret sat at the dining table with a box of tissues beside her. She had spent hours replaying everything, every birthday, every trip, every little lie she might have missed. "How could I not see it?" she whispered to herself, tracing the rim of her teacup. Linda placed a hand on her shoulder. "You saw what you wanted to believe, sis. You trusted him. That's not a weakness, it's love." Margaret nodded slowly, though her heart still ached with disbelief. Love. How strange that something so beautiful could leave such deep scars. That evening, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Her heart skipped. She hesitated before opening it. "Mrs. Hughes, I think we should talk. I'm sorry for everything." "Clara." Margaret froze. Her hands trembled as she read the name again. Clara, the other woman. The ghost who had haunted her nights since she found those pictures. She wanted to delete the message, to throw the phone away and pretend she never saw it. But curiosity, no pain, pushed her to reply. "What could you possibly have to say to me?" She typed back, her fingers shaking. The response came quickly. "Please. It's important. You don't know everything." Against her better judgment, Margaret agreed to meet. Maybe closure demanded courage. Maybe she just needed to look the truth in the eye, one last time. 2 days later, she met Clara at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. The world outside was draped in soft rain, grey and quiet. Margaret entered with her heart pounding. She scanned the tables until she saw her, Clara, younger by nearly 20 years, with tired eyes that carried their own kind of sadness. When their eyes met, the air between them grew heavy. Clara stood awkwardly. "Mrs. Hughes," she began softly. "Thank you for coming." Margaret sat, her face expressionless. "Just tell me why. Why did you do it?" Clara swallowed hard, her hands clutching her coffee cup. "I didn't mean for it to happen. When I met James, he told me he was separated. I didn't know the truth." "Not at first." Margaret's jaw tightened. "And when you did know?" Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "By then, I was already in love. I know that doesn't make it right. But he promised me things. He said he was unhappy, that he felt invisible. I believed him." Margaret sat silently. The words burned, but there was something in Clara's tone, genuine regret that softened her anger, if only a little. Clara continued, her voice trembling. "I ended it when I realized he'd never leave you, but there's something you should know." Margaret frowned. What could possibly matter now? Clara looked down, pulling a folded envelope from her purse. "He came to see me 3 weeks ago. He was crying. He said he made the biggest mistake of his life. He said he still loved you." Margaret's breath caught in her throat. "He came to see you after I found out?" Clara shook her head quickly. "No, before you found out. He told me he wanted to confess everything, to start over with you. He said he couldn't live with the guilt anymore. I think he really did love you." The words hit her like a wave. "Love?" Could love and betrayal live in the same heart? Clara's tears fell freely now. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know he wasn't lying when he said you were the love of his life. He talked about you all the time. The way your eyes light up when you cook, the garden you planted together, the way you used to dance in the kitchen. Margaret closed her eyes. Memories flooded her. Soft laughter, warm embraces, late-night talks. For a moment she saw the James she had loved, not the one who betrayed her. When she finally spoke, her voice was fragile but steady. Thank you for telling me. I can't forgive either of you. Not yet. But maybe someday. Clara nodded, whispering, I understand. Margaret stood, her hands trembling but her heart a little lighter. Goodbye, Clara. I hope you learn to love someone honestly. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. Margaret looked up at the grey sky and took a deep breath. For the first time since the truth came out, she felt something unfamiliar. Clarity. As she drove away from the cafe, she realized the hidden truth wasn't just about James or Clara. It was about herself. About the strength she never knew she had, the courage to face what most would run from, and the power to start over at any age. The past was broken, yes, but she was still standing. And that, she thought, was something worth holding on to. The morning after Margaret met Clara, she woke up with a strange sense of calm. The storm that had raged inside her heart for days had finally begun to settle, though the waves still rolled quietly underneath. She walked out into her sister's garden, the dew glistening on the grass like tiny mirrors catching the dawn light. The air smelled of lilacs and rain. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe without the ache of betrayal sitting on her chest. Maybe, she thought, the truth, no matter how painful, had set her free. But that fragile peace didn't last long. Later that afternoon, a knock echoed through the house. Linda answered it, and a familiar voice drifted in. Margaret froze. It was James. He stood on the porch looking older, smaller somehow. The confident man she once knew seemed to have vanished. In his hand he held a white envelope, folded and creased from being clutched too tightly. Please, he said softly when he saw her at the doorway. I just want to give you this. You don't have to talk to me. Just read it. Margaret said nothing. She didn't invite him in. She couldn't. She only nodded stiffly and took the envelope from his hand. Their fingers brushed for the briefest second, a touch that once meant everything, now carrying nothing but sorrow. When she closed the door, her heart pounded in her chest. The envelope felt heavy, as if it carried 40 years of love and lies all at once. She sat by the window, her trembling hands slowly opening the flap. Inside was a handwritten letter, the ink slightly smudged as though tears had fallen onto the page. She unfolded it carefully. My dearest Margaret, it began. If you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage I lacked for too long. I know I've destroyed something sacred between us, and no words can make that right. But I need you to know the truth before it's too late. Her eyes blurred as she read on. I met Clara during a time when I was weak. You were busy caring for your mother then, and I was selfishly lonely. Instead of being patient, instead of being the man you believed me to be, I chose the easy comfort of someone new. It started as conversation, then companionship, and then something I wish I could erase. But every moment I spent with her, I felt guilt pressing on my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. Margaret wiped her eyes. His words sliced through her. Clara didn't take me away from you, Margaret. I did that myself. I let my insecurities blind me to the woman who stood by me for 40 years, the woman who raised our children, who prayed for me when I was ill, who loved me when I didn't deserve it. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know that every single day, even in my worst choices, my heart still belonged to you. Her breath caught. I've ended things with Clara long ago, but I never ended the guilt. I wanted to tell you the truth so many times. Every time we sat across from each other at dinner, I wanted to confess, but I was a coward. I feared losing you, so I kept lying, and in doing so I lost you anyway. Margaret pressed the letter to her chest, tears spilling freely now. You were my home, Maggie. My greatest mistake wasn't loving someone else. It was forgetting, even for a moment, how blessed I was to be loved by you. If there's any justice left in the world, I pray it gives you peace, even if that peace doesn't include me All my love. Always, James. When she finished reading, the room seemed to spin. She sat silently for a long while, the letter trembling in her lap. Outside, the world moved on, the wind stirring the trees, the faint hum of cars in the distance, but Margaret's mind was a storm of emotions. She didn't know whether to hate him more for his confession or to thank him for finally telling the truth. For years she had begged for honesty, and now that it had come, it felt like too little, too late. Linda came into the room quietly. "You okay, sis?" Margaret looked up, her eyes red but strangely calm. "He wrote me a letter. Do you want to talk about it?" Linda asked gently. She shook her head. "No, not yet. I just need to feel this." She walked out into the garden again, letter still in hand. The sky was turning orange, the sun dipping behind the trees. She read the letter one more time, her tears mixing with the fading light. Then, without saying a word, she folded it neatly and tucked it inside her coat pocket. Maybe she wasn't ready to forgive. Maybe she never would. But as she looked up at the sunset, she realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for her. The truth had broken her, but it had also set her free. That night, she sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, the letter beside her. The crickets sang softly in the dark, and for the first time she didn't feel the ache of loss quite as sharply. It was still there, yes, but beneath it something new had begun to grow, something like strength, something like peace. Weeks passed and winter slowly gave way to spring. The frost melted from the fields outside Linda's farmhouse, and the world began to bloom again. But inside Margaret's heart, the healing came in small, uneven steps. Every morning she walked along the quiet dirt path behind the house, feeling the cold breeze against her face, letting her thoughts drift like fallen leaves in the wind. She didn't cry as much anymore. The pain was still there, sharp sometimes, but softer now, like an old scar learning to fade. One afternoon she went back to her own house for the first time. It had been over a month since she left, and just standing in front of it made her chest tighten. The home that once held laughter, love, and the hum of daily life now stood still, silent, and changed. She hesitated at the front door, key trembling in her hand. For a moment she thought about turning back, but she knew she had to go in. She had to face it. When she stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and the faint sweetness of old memories. The walls, the photographs, the furniture, everything looked the same, yet nothing felt the same. She walked slowly through the living room, her eyes landing on the photo wall, birthdays, vacations, their children's first days of school, anniversaries. She ran her fingers across one of the frames, whispering softly, "We were happy once." But she didn't cry this time, because for the first time she understood something she hadn't before. She had been happy, truly happy, even if James had betrayed her later. Those 40 years weren't lies. They were real in their moments. The laughter, the love, the family, they had existed. His mistakes couldn't erase them. She went upstairs to their old bedroom. The bed was still neatly made. On the nightstand lay the letter he had given her, the one she had read 100 times. She picked it up again, unfolding it gently. For a while she just stared at his handwriting, remembering the man she had loved and the promises they made. Then slowly she placed the letter back down and whispered, "Goodbye, James." With that, something inside her finally let go. In the weeks that followed, Margaret began rebuilding her life quietly, steadily. She joined a local women's book club. She volunteered at the library, helping children read. On Saturdays, she baked bread with Linda, the smell of flour and warmth filling the house with comfort. Every evening, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset. She started writing in a journal, a habit she hadn't had since her youth. At first, her words were filled with sadness, confusion, and regret, but slowly they began to change. Her entries started with lines like, "Today, I smiled for no reason. I went for a walk and didn't think of him. I'm learning how to love my own company." Each line was a step forward, a quiet declaration that she was still here, still alive and still capable of joy. One evening, as she was helping a young girl at the library learn to read, the child looked up at her and said, "You're really kind. You remind me of my grandma." Margaret smiled softly. For some reason, those simple words filled her heart with warmth. She realized that love doesn't die. It just changes form. It moves from people to moments, from pain to purpose. Months later, James passed away suddenly from a heart attack. The news came to her through their son. For a long while she sat in silence, unsure how to feel. There were no tears left to cry, only a quiet ache. At the funeral she stood by his grave, her hands clasped tightly together. The air was cool and still. As she placed a white lily on the coffin, she whispered, "I forgive you." It wasn't forgiveness for him, it was for her own peace. The words released the final piece of her pain, and as she walked away she felt lighter, freer than she had in years. That night, she wrote one final entry in her journal. 40 years of love, 1 year of pain, and now peace. I'm not broken. I'm becoming. From that day on, Margaret lived differently. She traveled with Linda to Italy, a trip they had always dreamed of. She took up painting again, filling her home with color and life. And on Sunday mornings, she'd sit by the window, sunlight streaming across her face, smiling at how far she'd come. Because healing didn't mean forgetting, it meant remembering without breaking. And in that quiet truth, Margaret found something she never expected to find again, herself. As she stood on a hill one afternoon, looking out over the valley, the wind brushing her hair, she closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, life, for giving me another chance." The pain had shaped her, but it hadn't defined her. Her story wasn't one of betrayal. It was one of strength, survival, and rediscovery. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Margaret smiled, the kind of smile that comes not from happiness, but from peace. The chapter of James had ended, but the story of Margaret had just begun.